Hi, everyone, and welcome to this Automotive News Congress Conversation. I'm Hannah Lutz, Director of Technology and Innovation Coverage at Automotive News, coming to you from our studio in Detroit. Automotive News reporter Paige Hodder is with me in studio. Hi, Paige.
Hi.
Thanks to Cars Commerce for supporting this session. Today, we'll discuss vehicle affordability. The average transaction price for new vehicles has increased by about $15,000 over the past decade, according to Experian. The rise has been gradual, but now tariffs and other costs could elevate prices quickly. That leaves consumers with a big question: buy now or wait it out for a potentially lower price later? We'll talk about how that dynamic is affecting today's market. Let's welcome today's panelists. Jenni Newman, Editor-in-Chief at Cars.com. Hi, Jenni.
Hey.
Laura Perrotta, President of the New Jersey Coalition of Automotive Retailers. Hi, Laura. Melinda Zabritski, Head of Automotive Financial Insights at Experian Automotive. Hi, Melinda. And Shirley Jones, CFO of CarPros Automotive Group. Hi, Shirley. We want the audience to be a part of the conversation, so say hi in the chat, tell us where you're watching, and we really want to know all of your questions. So please put them in the comments and we'll answer as many as we can during this live stream. So affordability has been such an important topic recently. Let's get right into it. Our first question is really, how do you define affordability? There's so much that goes into it. Is it about price, payment, or access to credit? Jenni, can you start us off?
It's interesting defining affordability. I think ultimately that is all about the shopper and what their life looks like, what their budget looks like. Something we really need to ground this conversation in is cars are essential to everyday Americans. For most Americans, the cars that we're going to talk about, the affordability issue, they're dealing with cars as a need, not as a want. And so I think it's really important to remember that. Of course, we're seeing a lot of pressure on the new car side, as you mentioned, and also on the used car side. When we look at Cars.com's average list price for used cars, we're seeing an average of $29,600 for a used car, with often higher mileage and a lot of pressure right now.
All right. Next question. Are we nearing an affordability crash? And what early warning signals should dealers watch out for before affordability crashes in their local markets? Melinda, let's start with you.
Well, I think it's interesting when we talk about words like crash, because you can go back, a handful of years ago and everyone asked me, is $500 the limit on a new car monthly payment? And we soared right through that. But certainly, the affordability issue continues to be out there, and we continue to see consumers respond by moving into older and older vehicles, trying to keep things more affordable. But I don't think we're really looking at a crash, but I think we're looking at consumers who previously might have been new car buyers who are now going to be moving into the used car market just simply because they can't afford to buy a new car.
And what does that mean for the traditional used car buyers? Jenni just told us how high the average used car price is. Where do they go?
Well, that's where we're seeing them shift into older and older vehicles. There's really high demand for late model used cars right now because of the lack of leasing a handful of years ago. That feeds late model used availability. And we increasingly see consumers shift into older and older cars. Just so far this year, over 40% of consumers who bought cars were 9+ model years old. So I think it's just that evolution of consumers moving from new to late model used, those consumers shifting into a mid-year model, and then shifting into older and older.
Shirley, bringing you in from the dealership perspective, what are those customers looking for? Do you have inventory that you're able to offer them to get to that low payment? How are you navigating those conversations?
From the dealership perspective, we are navigating this new world that we're in with affordability of vehicles. We're listening to our customers. We're making sure that we give them transparency with pricing. And yes, sometimes the consumers are leaning back towards those vehicles that are older models, but we're putting them on a pathway of, this is the vehicle you might be purchasing today. We bring them back in. A couple of years later, we're going to transition you from this vehicle to a newer model. So we're giving them a platform to move from from older model to a more current year vehicles.
And Laura, I know that you work with lots of dealers in your state of New Jersey. What is their experience with this, these affordability challenges across the board, across used, new EVs we were just speaking about before the call?
Oh, thank you, Hannah. It is challenging, absolutely. And, when there are incentives from the state, that is helpful. And, it is a challenge as well with the federal EV incentive just going away. That's $7,500 at the point of sale there from the federal government. That's challenging. And on top of that, in New Jersey, we have a situation where we have an affordability crisis in the state, not just in the auto space, but our energy prices are skyrocketing. Housing's completely unaffordable. There's article after article where consumers are trying to decide whether to pay for their groceries or pay their electricity bill. And then you're like, and now we want to buy a new car for our family as well. So it's a ripple effect of challenges right now.
Are there certain price segments that are most at risk right now, especially as tariffs take effect? Is like the middle of the market, for example, most at risk? Are you seeing more risk in the upper or lower end? Who wants to start on that one? Jenni?
I'll jump in. So yeah, I think absolutely the most at risk is the 30K and under car, which is kind of ironic as we're sitting here talking about affordability. We're seeing that 30K cars and under, the market share is just 13%. And that is down, especially if you look at 2019 before the pandemic, that market share was 38%. So those vehicles that, we're in a sweet spot for people looking for a budget vehicle who might be thinking about used, but perhaps want the extra warranties and the reassurance that comes with buying new. They're really stuck because there's less to buy there. And of course, part of the reason why is because of the tariffs that we're seeing with the current administration. That is impacting the way that automakers are thinking about the mix that they're bringing to dealerships. And a lot of these vehicles are made outside of the US, and that is impacting what's actually being sold here.
You know what, Hannah, can I interject there? What the dealerships are really looking for is for lease returns, and that's how we are able to fill that segment of vehicle inventory here at CarPros through retaining customers, repeat customers that are coming back into the dealership. So we're able to take a lease return that's in that segment of $35,000 to $40,000 and then have that vehicle available for sale. We have our BMW store as well. In that segment, we have not seen a decline for those consumers who like to purchase luxury vehicles. But going back to the segment of that $35 to $40 market value, we're really relying on our retention of our customers coming back in, repeat customers, trading in those vehicles for us to have vehicles frontline and ready for our consumers to purchase.
Yeah, and I can add on to that because it's when I look at what the most common leased vehicles out there, it's some of those mid-size, smaller CUV SUVs. It's RAV4. It's, you still always have the Camry in there, but it's also a lot of big trucks. And lately it's a lot of EVs. I mean, this year was kind of the trough of off-lease vehicles because we're coming in off of 2022. Next year, we're going to pick up some additional, about another million, but also increasingly more of those vehicles coming off lease are going to be EVs. They're 20% of what's leased. So yeah, we're going to start having some more late model used vehicles next year, but the mix is going to be different.
Right. And along with the new EV incentive, the used federal incentive also went away. So that doesn't help the used EV prices either. I wanted to remind the audience that we are taking audience questions. We got a couple so far, but keep them coming. And Paige, I think you had a question to ask as well.
Yeah. Following up with Melinda, besides tariffs, what other factors are increasing monthly payments?
Well, certainly the rate increases didn't help. So rates coming down are certainly going to benefit. But it's also, again, it's just purely the prices going up. You've got every new year comes out, the new models are going to be priced a little bit above the previous year models. Again, on the used vehicle side, it's still very tight inventory, so used values continue to be high. And what I tend to notice in the data is once prices go up, whether it's demand or whether it's tariffs, they don't come down. Even if tariffs go away, we're not going to see those prices come down. You know, on the new side, when we had the dealer markups at the very high increases a handful of years ago, inventory recovered, prices didn't come down. So that certainly doesn't help. I think the one thing that does help, though, is on the lender side, we have lenders who are increasingly looking at moving into longer term loans. Some lenders that wouldn't go beyond a 72 are starting to look at 84. We do have some specialty lenders out there who specialize in 95, 96, 100-month loans, which is kind of unfathomable to think of. But, you know, terms certainly help. But like I said, prices go up, they won't come down.
We have a good question from the audience. This is from Matthew. It's directed to Jenni to start. Is there any data on which generation of buyers is driving higher purchase prices, or are higher prices happening really across the board, no matter the age of the buyer?
That's a great question. I think we're seeing higher purchase prices across the board. As Melinda was mentioning, the tightness in the used car market is impacting. It's all connected. New and used are connected. So as new goes up, used goes up, right? We're seeing a little bit less inventory in some of these segments. I think one area that's interesting, and we were talking about the 30K price bucket. One area that we are seeing a little bit of growth is 30K to under 50K. We're seeing automakers be really thoughtful about the way that they're approaching some of their trims and the pricing there. And so for shoppers who are have a little bit of flexibility with their budget, they may be able to find some relief by looking at lower trim levels in that bracket. So that could be an area for shoppers of all ages to spend a little more time doing some research.
I think we have it. Oh, go ahead.
Because I was just looking at purchases by generation,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that the answer really is not necessarily generations driving the prices. I think it's what's out there drives what the generations do,
Okay.
as far as whether they buy new, whether they buy used. And looking at new cars, we still have, Gen X is still the largest buying population, but the growth is in millennials. And what I tend to see is, there is that correlation between age and credit. Your more entry level consumers, your Gen Z rather, is new to market. They're growing. They start off, lower credit, less availability to be able to move into a new car. They tend to start with used. And then as they age, they're able to move into more of the new market. And then of those younger generations, I'm increasingly seeing them shift into leasing. And that's what drives those lower price points and those lower payments. So I think it's more of what is out there in the marketplace drives what the different generations do.
Melinda,
on the leasing, can I add to that?
Sure.
On the leasing front, when you think about Gen Z and even millennials and the way that they have developed as shoppers and consumers, what we've noticed at cars.com is that they start to view vehicles more as a technology. So these are generations that have been raised sort of with the iPhone or their cell phones, and they are used to this technology being updated frequently. And so it's not a big surprise to hear Melinda say that they're leaning into leasing, because they are sort of preconditioned to think about needing their technology to be up to date and newer. So, there's a trend, there's a correlation there as well.
Yeah, and sort of subscribing to something too. I had a question about leasing. Leasing has been really sort of state by state or region by region. Is that still happening, or are you seeing it become more prominent across the country with this generation?
It definitely varies by state. The Northeast, high rates of leasing. California, high rates of leasing.
Yes.
The South, you see very low levels of leasing. Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, very low levels of leasing there. So I definitely see leasing very geographically focused. Also you think about the Dakotas, not a lot of leasing in the Dakotas. So again, it's going to be focused around very high concentrated, more urban areas where the driving is much shorter distances. Like I said, Pacific Northwest, also the Northeast, but yes, very geo-focused.
I would like to chime in there just to give insight to what Melinda just stated there. Within our automotive group here, we have definitely seen an increase of our lease penetration year over year, whether it was leasing EV vehicles or your EV or your ICE vehicles. We definitely have seen an increase of our penetration, definitely in the Northwest and our Washington location. So I would just like to validate that that is definitely a trend that we're seeing here in our Washington dealerships.
Okay. And not only for EVs because of the credit, but for ICE vehicles, you said as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
that is correct.
Laura, when customers come into the dealership, do they understand what they're walking into? Are they prepared for these high prices and these high payment quotes that they'll inevitably get before they leave the store?
Yeah, the consumers are so educated nowadays. Everyone is shopping around online and figuring out what they want to test drive. And they're very educated consumers that come in, and everyone's following what's happening with the tariffs and the announcements, and just they're extremely knowledgeable. So we've got very educated, sharp consumers who are coming in trying to get the best deal they possibly can, and they're shopping around. So they know what they're getting into. I do think, nationally we saw a little bit of a rush because of the tariffs and the EV mandates going away, obviously this year to market. We saw, I was just looking at charts over the time this year of the spikes up at certain periods of time, right before when the tariffs were being announced, people rushing out to purchase. And then again in September, obviously with the EV incentives going away. So I'd just say, the customers know that costs are increasing. They are very, very smart about this. And it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen in 2026 as, these tariffs really start to hit home if we don't see adjustments.
All right, what trends are you guys seeing in borrower profiles? Are more consumers stretching their budgets, or are credit constraints forcing some people out of the market? Shirley, can we start with you?
Sure, great question there, Hannah. Consumers are really focused on monthly payments. They want to ensure that the payment they're receiving is something that's sustainable over a long period of time. Consumers want to ensure that it fits within their budget, not just for their vehicle purchase, but does it fit within their rent? Do they fit within all of the other expenses that they have in their home? So they're having to pivot and strategize and look at vehicles that are more strategic, maybe selecting a lesser trim line, but getting a vehicle that's affordable and that's reliable and dependable.
We talked about, I guess we didn't directly answer, but talked about the idea of customers staying on the sidelines, being out of the market with prices so high. How much of a risk is that right now? Is it actually happening, or do you foresee it happening soon? And what would the long-term impact of it be? Laura, let's start with you, just talking about New Jersey, because you talked about how there's an affordability crisis really beyond auto there.
Right. And actually I was just sitting through a presentation yesterday at this conference that 37% of new car buyers make under $100,000. Isn't that, that's fairly hard to wrap your mind around. So folks are unfortunately getting priced out of the new car market. And so they're going to have to turn to used. They're going to have to hold on to the vehicles longer. That will shift things for the dealers where there's going to be more profit on the service side, obviously, because you want to maintain these vehicles. But, it's getting, something needs to be done, and I do think with the elimination of the electric vehicle mandates that we will see an adjustment where, more ICE is being produced and maybe it will be more market driven, which will be positive. And in New Jersey in particular, one of the things that we've really tried to do is just stress to the legislature the importance of keeping these vehicles affordable and offering incentives and opportunities to get folks into a new car, because you have to have a new car market to have a used car market, obviously, and we need to move the metal. And they get that. And we had actually a fight this year in the legislature on preserving our vehicle trade-in tax credit. The New Jersey governor was trying to eliminate this as a pay for the budget, But we had to make the case that how could you constrain these consumers anymore with their affordability options by taking in that invaluable credit when they're trading in their vehicle, which still retains a lot of value, to go towards the purchase of the new vehicle. So we were able to make that case, and the legislature completely got it. But we just have to stay vigilant that we're always being the voice of the consumer just as much as the dealer, so that their opportunities to get into that new vehicle are preserved.
Yeah, I want to get back to some of the state by state dynamics, what's being done at the state level. But before we get there, anyone else have thoughts on, what that long-term impact of consumers staying out of the market might be?
I think we just have to. Cars are essential. They're an essential part of life, right? We need them to get to our jobs. We need them to take the children to school, and so trying to make sure that we have affordable vehicles is critical, not just for people's livelihoods. And we were talking about longer loans, right? And ways to make that possible for people. A little bit of the concern about a longer loan, of course, is that the total cost of the vehicle increases. And so that's something that shoppers really need to think through as they are trying to fit this vehicle into their monthly budget. They also need to think about sort of that long-term impact. And we know that people are cutting back. Cars.com did a recent study of families, of parents, and we found that 3 out of 4 parents told us that they have had to change their household spending habits in the past year. And so we know people are making hard choices already. And how do we make sure that, this panel, right, where we represent a lot of different interests, that we make sure that ultimately consumers are getting into these essential vehicles?
Yeah, and let me add on to this, and I've got kind of 2 points to make. And I think when, of course, being Experian, I'm going to look at it from the credit standpoint. And, the prime market is, of course, when we look at new cars, most of the market is very prime. It's really when you start looking at the lower scoring, more subprime consumer space, this is the area that's the hardest hit. And it's something that I've been talking about for years, is as the market moves away from sedans, as everything becomes SUVs, those price points are higher. And so your subprime consumer who's looking for a sedan, looking for, a minivan, there's fewer and fewer of those out there, with those lower price points. So it's this segment of the market that I think is the area that is of the most concern, because especially the lowest scoring consumers, we haven't seen as large of an increase in volume as what they used to represent prior to COVID, prior to the inventory shortages when prices skyrocketed. So that, of course, is the area I think that is of the most concern. The second point is, even though, you look at a long-term loan, and yes, the totality of payments will increase, because usually the longer term, you'll also have slightly higher rates. But again, as consumers really are just managing the household budget, all they're looking at is what that monthly payment is. And the other thing we're starting to see a lot more of is auto refi, being able to refi your loan, which can save, last time I looked at the data, it was on average a savings of about $75 a month. That could pay a utility bill. So that is something that we're seeing a lot more of, but also to that consumer education. These are consumers that are, maybe a year, 2 years into their loan payment that they started at 72 months, and now they're refining at about 65 months. So if they were to stay in that loan the entire time, we're talking 100-month loans. So, but again, it's cash flow. It's all about the cash flow.
We have a few more audience questions actually. So thanks for sending those in. One from Mike Finko. How long do you project this difficult financial period to last? He's comparing it to 2008, 2020. He referenced the Fed using quantitative easing. And he's also noting that salaries are rising slowly while average transaction prices for vehicles are climbing fast. So, looking into a crystal ball here, I guess, how long do you expect this to go? Melinda, would you like to start on this?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, when we saw the spike in prices in 2022, a lot of that, of course, were, some dealer markups with very low inventory spilled over into used. Even though inventory recovered, we didn't see prices come down. And especially if we start having lower volume of new car sales, which we have had for the last couple of years, that does spill over into a very tight used car market. So unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball, but I don't see things easing up anytime in the next several years, unless there are, government programs that come into play, as Laura was mentioning. So I just don't see things really coming down.
And that reminds me, we wanted to go back to what the states are doing. So let's go there. So I know, Melinda, you look at nationwide and are in Colorado. Shirley, you're in California, and Jenni, you also look nationwide. So let's start with California. Shirley, what are you seeing on the horizon there?
In regards to, I'm interested as well as you are, Hannah, to see what's going to come with the state incentives, whether it's EV or for some type of based upon income level to get new consumers back into the marketplace. So I don't have necessarily any particular insight, but the one thing I do really know is that rebates have been a pivotal contributor to selling of new vehicles. So I'm really excited to see if the state comes back with some of those mandates to provide for the consumer.
Jenni, do any states stick out to you as having strong affordability programs?
We actually have representation here today because we've got Laura in New Jersey, we've got Melinda in Colorado, I'm in Illinois. Those three states, they do have incentives around EVs. And so I think there's a lot of talk, of course, about the federal EV tax credit going away. And I think consumers need to know that there are still credits available through some states. So it's definitely worth digging into that. And the other side of it too, right, is automakers. Automakers on the EV front, at least, are, helping to try to boost EV sales in this changing environment by offering essentially their own version of the tax credit to the price of the vehicle. So that's, there are a bunch of ways I think that shoppers can sort of dig in to see how they can help lower the cost of a car they're considering.
Yeah, New Jersey, I'll just add that, the EV incentives are helpful. They do help get customers into the vehicle. Unfortunately, our state has kind of lowered those incentives over time, which is something we have pushed back on and said, we really need to increase the incentive, not lower the incentive as these vehicles become more expensive across the board. But I know for our dealers too, they've really relied on the EV infrastructure incentives as well to get chargers at their dealerships. That's extremely important too. But it will be interesting to see what happens though, really, with the product mix as these mandates for having deadlines to introduce EVs at a certain threshold for sales, how that might change things, when there's not as much pressure to meet artificial targets, really.
And Paige, you wrote about the $1,000 payment buyers recently. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so this is a trend I've been tracking for a while because the idea of paying $1,000 or more for my car kind of just blows my mind. So 17.5% of new vehicle buyers who financed their purchase with a loan signed up to pay $1,000 or more a month from January to July this year, according to Experian. How are these high payment buyers shaping the auto retail industry? Melinda, can we start with you?
Yeah, like I said, I've also been tracking this for quite a while. We went from, the last 5-6 years, it was less than 5% to now, over 17%. What's interesting with this payment group is, the big growth, like I said, really occurred in 2022. And prior to that, the people with these $1,000 payments, I think, knew what they were getting into. As Laura was talking about, as consumer education, I think the increase in that payment really was more of a surprise to the 2022 and 23 buyers. More recent ones, I think, are expecting it. Like I said, more educated now. They've been, they know what's out there. But what's interesting with this is most of these vehicles are trucks. It's F-150s. It's the big trucks. Those buyers aren't going away. A lot of these are used as, personal work trucks. So it does, I think, shift the market a little bit because of, again, it could potentially, some of these buyers who maybe need a big truck might not be able to afford one. But that's what that market is it's truck buyers.
Are you seeing that on the ground, Shirley and Laura? Those very high payment buyers?
Yes. And also think too with, electric vehicles are more expensive. There was a lot of pressure to push those out the door too. But also everyone still wants the trucks and the large SUVs, just like Melinda was saying. That is the hot space that everyone wants to be in, and it drives the higher payments, and we're not seeing an end. It was good for some of the EV leasing was so positive because of the incentives from the manufacturers that you could get a really affordable payment on some of those EVs. It's just a very dynamic situation overall, but we are definitely just continuing to see higher lease payments as we've seen in the data.
Yeah, to give some insight from the dealership's perspective, some of those payments is coming from our luxury store of those higher prices. But as stated before, with the support of the mandates of the EV credits, we've been able to help mitigate some of those prices where those monthly payments are not above the $1,000. So the credits have definitely been able to reduce those monthly payments. And we've seen it primarily in our lease models, but not so much our non-lease models that our luxury models. Our luxury models is where we're really seeing those prices above $1,000. But for our leases, we're not seeing that impact. For our non-luxury models, we're not seeing that as much over 1,000.
Okay, well, we are running out of time here. Thanks for sharing all these great insights with us. Paige, do you have one more question before we wrap up?
I do. Thank you. Looking ahead, we're starting to wind down the year. Obviously, as we've established, the affordability situation is not going anywhere anytime soon. So what should dealers be preparing for in the first quarter of 2026 based on current trends?
Jenni, do you want to start?
You give me the hard one. I think we're starting to see the impact of tariffs. And so, we're seeing some automakers be relatively upfront about those increases, but prices are going to increase. And so the difficulties around affordability are going to increase unless we see some major move by the federal government. As we were talking about all of this, I was thinking about cash for clunkers. Back in, was it 08? I know, sorry, Melinda, but back in 08, right? And just thinking through, is that a way to sort of, give a boost to affordability and what is going on right now and bring more cars into the used side of things? No idea. I'm not a politician, thankfully, so we'll stay out of that. But
the last thing we want is a tight used vehicle, VIO or vehicles on the road of, late model car park. The last thing we want to do is pull some of those out. We need to keep the used car market. We need to keep that volume. I would comment from what I see in the data, I think the areas for the dealers, first of all, get ready for used EVs coming back. What are you going to do with those if the consumer's wanting to trade that in? But I think also to the point of the tariffs, I think there will be the need for the dealer to be able to educate the consumer, because you might walk into, I'll just use Ford as an example. You might walk into a Ford store. Some of the models are impacted by tariffs, some of them aren't. So having that consumer education of being able to talk to the consumer about perhaps why. But the other thing, yes, get ready for those EVs coming back.
Yeah, every brand is going to be hit differently by the tariffs, as we all know. It's like a scale. And we are seeing, though, announcements where maybe Trump's plan is working, where there's more investment in the United States and, changing factory focus. And so I'm always optimistic, as the dealers are always optimistic, that we will mitigate any storm and that we're going to survive this like we survived every other crisis that has occurred, like COVID.
Most definitely. In 2026, I'm looking from a lens from the OEM, the finance companies collaborating, coming with some strategies to help offset some of the tariff costs that we might see in 2026. To Jenni's point, she spoke briefly about cars for clunkers, and it just reminded me of maybe there's a segue that we can do some deferred first payments or 90 days of deferred payments. So those are some strategies that I can see that potentially in 2026 that can help drive consumers back into the dealerships and to help mitigate some of the tariff costs that we might be seeing coming ahead of us.
All right. Well, thank you. That'll do it for today. Keep following autonews.com for the latest. And thank you to our Congress Conversations production team, Rudy Shork, Jake Neer, Tiara Riddick, and Terry Kostrowski. And another thank you to our panelists, Jenni Newman, Melinda Zabritski, Laura Perrotta, and Shirley Jones. And thanks again to Cars Commerce and to you for tuning in and sending your questions. For Paige Hodder and the rest of the Automotive News team, I'm Hannah Lutz. See you next time.